Hey everyone, quick look at this. See that? Almost 98% of you watching aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is the best way to not miss any new infidelity stories and support what we do here. It's free and it makes a huge difference. Hit that subscribe button below. Okay, now to today's story.
Look, I know how this sounds. Believe me, I've replayed it in my head a million times, trying to make sense of it, trying to find the moment where things went, well, sideways. But maybe there wasn't one single moment. Maybe it was just a slow simmer, a gradual warming that I didn't recognize until the pot boiled over. I was 47, see? Not exactly a spring chicken. My life was settled, predictable. Some might even say boring. Work, book club, the occasional dinner with a friend. And then there was Richard, my roommate, 23 years old. I know. It sounds strange. A woman my age sharing a house with someone so young. But it wasn't like that. He was good company. Quiet, respectful, always there with a cup of tea when I looked like I'd had a rough day. More like a very considerate, very young lodger than a friend, really. I kept a careful distance, constantly reminding myself that he was practically still a kid. He talked about college, about his future, and I'd listen, offering the occasional bit of probably unwanted advice, feeling a world away from those youthful concerns. My world was about deadlines and mortgages, and wondering if my knees would hold up. During my morning walk, Richard was a pleasant background hum in my otherwise quiet existence. Until one Tuesday morning, the sun, as it usually did, managed to sneak past the cheap curtains in my bedroom, painting stripes of weak gold on the wall. I stretched, the cotton sheets feeling cool against my skin, and let out that sigh I mentioned. Just another Tuesday. Nothing to write home about. Or so I thought. The house was still, the kind of quiet you only get before the world really wakes up. I padded down the hallway, the old wooden floorboards creaking softly under my bare feet. I could smell coffee. Richard was always up before me, a morning person in the truest sense of the word. He'd have music on low, or be humming to himself as he moved around the kitchen. It was a comforting sound, a sign that the day was starting, even if my part in it hadn't quite begun yet. But as I got closer to the kitchen, I heard another sound. A softer sound. A rhythmic thumping. Almost like kneading. I stopped just outside the door, my hand hovering over the cool metal knob. Curiosity, that old cat, had its claws in me. I hesitated for a second, the urge to just turn around and go back to bed battling with this sudden intrigue, but the smell of the coffee, and now this unexpected sound, pulled me in. Slowly, carefully, I eased the door open. The hinges, bless their old age, let out a tiny, almost apologetic squeak. And there he was, Richard, standing at the counter, his back to me, and, well, he didn't have a shirt on. Now, I'd seen him without a shirt before, usually heading to or from the shower. It wasn't a big deal. He was just a young man in his own home. But this was different. The morning light caught the sweat glistening on his shoulders, the muscles in his back flexing as he leaned over the counter. And then I saw what he was doing. He was kneading dough. His hands, strong and capable, pressed into the soft white mass with a tenderness that, well, it did something to me. It was such an ordinary act making bread, but the way he was doing it, the focus in his posture, the almost sensual way his hands moved. It was unexpectedly intimate. My cheeks flushed, and I suddenly felt like I was intruding on something private. Something primal. Morning already? I blurted out, perhaps a little too loudly, making him jump. He turned around quickly, his blue eyes widening in surprise. A dusting of flour across his cheek. "Emma, didn't hear you there." He seemed a little flustered, quickly wiping his hands on a towel. "Sorry, didn't realize I was—" He gestured vaguely at his bare chest. No, it's fine," I said, perhaps a little too quickly. Just the smell of the coffee, and that rhythmic sound. "What are you making?" I tried to sound casual, like this was a perfectly normal Tuesday morning conversation. "Oh, this?" He held up his hands, still slightly sticky with dough. "Just trying my hand at some bread. My mom used to make it all the time. Said there's nothing like fresh, homemade bread in the morning? It smells wonderful, I admitted, taking a step further into the kitchen. You're quite the early bird, he chuckled. Yeah, I guess so. You usually take a bit longer to surface. Guilty as charged, I said, managing a smile. So, what inspired this sudden baking spree? Just felt like it, I guess, he said, turning back to the counter and resuming his kneading. Needed something to occupy my hands. Plus, I thought you might like some. You always seem to enjoy the toast. Fresh bread is a whole different. Ball game, I said, watching his hands work. You're really good at that. He glanced over his shoulder, a hint of pride in his eyes. Thanks. She taught me well. Said the secret is in the kneading. I must have made some sort of noise, a little gasp perhaps, because he turned around suddenly. His blue eyes, usually so bright and full of energy, widened in surprise. For a moment we just stood there staring at each other. The air in the kitchen felt thick, charged with something I couldn't quite name. His chest rose and fell with each breath, and my gaze, against my will, was drawn to the dusting of flour on his skin, clinging to the curve of his collarbone. My mouth suddenly felt very dry. Emma, he said, his voice lower, rougher than usual. I didn't hear you come in. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't mean to intrude. I just smelled the coffee. He smiled then, a slow, easy smile that always managed to make my stomach do a little flip. But this time, it was different. It felt charged. You're not intruding, he said. I was just making breakfast. Thought you might like some fresh bread. I nodded, the words catching in my throat. The kitchen, which usually felt spacious and airy, suddenly seemed small, the air crackling with an energy I couldn't ignore. I watched as he turned back to the dough, his hands moving with a practiced ease. There was something mesmerizing about the way he worked, the way his fingers pressed and folded, the subtle shift of muscles beneath his skin. A strange longing, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, stirred in my chest. You're really good at that? I whispered, the words almost escaping before I could stop them. He glanced over his shoulder, his smile widening. Thanks. My mom taught me. She always said there's nothing more comforting than fresh bread. I nodded again, my throat tight. Comfort. That's what Richard had always been to me. A source of quiet comfort and stability. But now, in the warm, flour-dusted kitchen, I felt anything but comfortable. My skin tingled, my senses felt heightened, every nerve ending suddenly aware of his presence. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to feel the warmth radiating from his body. But of course, I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I turned away, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for a mug. The coffee was hot, the steam curling up in delicate wisps, but it didn't do much to settle the sudden turmoil inside me. I could feel Richard's eyes on me, his gaze heavy, questioning. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what he might see reflected in my own eyes. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, until he finally spoke. Emma? I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my chest. Yes, he hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. I've been wanting to tell you something. My breath caught in my throat, my mind suddenly racing with possibilities, none of which I dared to fully entertain. But before he could continue, the oven timer beeped, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet kitchen. He blinked, the moment seemingly broken, and turned to pull a golden brown loaf of bread from the oven. The tension in the room didn't disappear, though. It just shifted, became something else. Something waiting. As I watched him slice the warm bread, the rich, yeasty aroma filling the air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. Something profound, something irreversible. And as I took the first bite of the warm, buttery bread, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that nothing would ever quite be the same again. After that morning, it felt like we were living in some kind of weird, unspoken agreement. Like we'd both seen something we weren't supposed to, and now we were just waiting to see what would happen next. Richard and I started circling. each other, drawn by an invisible thread, something neither of us could quite explain, but also unable to fully bridge the gap that had suddenly appeared between us. The house felt different. The air was thick with a tension that hummed beneath. The surface of every interaction heavy with unsaid words and stolen glances. Every accidental brush of hands in the hallway, every moment our eyes met for just a fraction too long, felt significant, loaded with meaning. But we stayed silent. Saying it out loud, whatever it was, would make it real. And I don't think either of us was quite ready for that reality. I found myself lingering in the kitchen more often, pretending to need another cup of coffee, or suddenly feeling the urge to reorganize the spice rack just to be near him. I'd watch him. As he made his morning coffee, moving with a new kind of deliberate slowness, his eyes flicking up to meet mine when he thought I wasn't looking. There was a new intensity about him, a quiet energy that made my heart race whenever his gaze lingered. One evening, the sun was setting, painting the sky in those glorious shades of orange and pink that always make me feel a little melancholic. I was standing by the living room window, nursing a glass of wine, lost in thought as I looked out at the garden. The roses were in full bloom, their petals a riot of color, and the air was thick with the sweet scent of jasmine. It was a perfect, peaceful scene. But inside, I felt a restless energy, a knot of something I couldn't quite identify tightening in my stomach. I heard him approach, the soft creak of the floorboards in the hallway, the gentle rustle of his clothes. My breath hitched in my throat, but I didn't turn around immediately. I just closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the sound of his footsteps getting closer. "Emma?" he called softly, his voice just above a whisper. I opened my eyes and turned to see him standing a few feet away, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans, his posture tense. The fading light cast long shadows across his face, making him look both incredibly young and surprisingly resolute. "Richard," I whispered back. "What is it?" He hesitated, looking down at the floor for a moment before his eyes met mine again. "I can't stop thinking about that night." "Me neither," I admitted, my voice barely audible. I took a sip of my wine, my hand trembling slightly. He took a step closer. What do you think it meant?" I shook my head, feeling a lump forming in my throat. "I don't know what it means, Richard. I honestly don't. It just happened." "But did it feel wrong?" he asked, his eyes searching mine intently. I hesitated. "No," I finally said, the truth echoing in the quiet room. "It didn't feel wrong. It felt unexpected and maybe a little scary." He closed the remaining distance between us, gently reaching out to brush a stray strand of hair away from my face. His touch was light, tentative, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know this is complicated. I know I'm younger, and you're you, but I can't help how I feel. I can't stop wanting you." My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to say it was impossible, that we were too different, that no one would understand. But looking into his eyes, I saw my own longing reflected, back at me, clear and undeniable. "Richard," I said, my voice trembling, "I don't know what will happen. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you either." He exhaled, a visible wave of relief washing over him. "So, what do we do now?" I shook my head again, a small, uncertain smile playing on my lips. "I honestly have no idea." He let out a shaky breath, and I could see the relief wash over his face. He reached out, gently taking my wine glass and setting it down on the nearby table. Then he pulled me closer, his hands settling on my waist. His touch was warm, firm, and surprisingly reassuring, filling me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. We stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, absorbed in the quiet intimacy of the fading light. The world outside the window seemed to fade away, and it was just us, two people drawn together by something neither of us fully understood. Then, slowly, he leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, exploratory kiss. It was filled with all the unspoken emotions of the past few weeks. The longing, the desire, the underlying fear of what we were doing. His lips were soft against mine, his touch gentle, yet there was a hunger in the kiss that mirrored my own. His hands moved up my back, pulling me closer, and I found myself instinctively reaching up to cup his face. The world seemed to tilt, on its axis. He deepened the kiss, and my knees felt like they might buckle. He lifted me slightly, just enough to carry me a few steps towards the sofa. And then we were there, tangled together, the fire between us igniting with a sudden, almost reckless intensity. It was foolish. I knew it was. There were a million reasons why this shouldn't be happening. The age difference, the potential for judgment, the sheer uncertainty of it all. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way he made me feel. Alive, desired, wanted. It had been so long since I'd felt that way. The night unfolded in a blur of whispered words, gentle touches, and a sense of urgency that surprised us both. It was like a dam had finally broken, releasing a torrent of emotions that had been building for weeks. We talked, we laughed nervously, and then we fell silent, lost in the physical connection that had sprung up between us. It felt both completely new and strangely familiar, like we had somehow known each other in a different life. But as the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room in a pale, uncertain light, the reality of what we had done began to sink in. Guilt, fear, and a heavy dose of doubt started to creep into my thoughts. What had we done? What did this mean for us? For him? I lay there, watching the dust motes dance in the early morning light, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Richard's arm was still wrapped around my waist, his warm breath brushing against my neck. Listening to his steady, peaceful breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if we had made a terrible mistake, a decision we would both come to regret. Or perhaps we had stumbled upon something real, something meaningful, in the most unexpected of places. The days that followed were complicated. We navigated our new reality with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. There was an undeniable connection between us, a spark that ignited every time our eyes met. But the age difference loomed, large, a silent presence in every conversation, every shared meal. The fear of judgment, from friends, from family, even from ourselves, was always there, lurking in the background. And the uncertainty about the future felt like a heavy weight pressing down on us. We talked about it, of course, tentatively, awkwardly, trying to find the right words to express the whirlwind of emotions we were both feeling. Richard was surprisingly mature about it all. He acknowledged the age gap, the potential difficulties, but he insisted that his feelings were genuine. He said he wasn't just infatuated, that he saw something real in me, something he hadn't found with anyone else. And honestly, hearing him say those things, it chipped away at my doubts, just a little. I, on the other hand, was a mess of conflicting emotions. Part of me felt a giddy, almost youthful happiness, a sense of being truly seen and desired. But another part of me was terrified. Terrified of what people would think. Terrified of hurting Richard. Terrified that this was just a temporary fantasy that would eventually crash and burn. I often found myself flashing back to that night in the living room, the moment everything changed. It was a moment of such raw honesty, such vulnerability. We had both admitted something that felt both incredibly risky and utterly inevitable. As I sit here now, looking back on it all, I still don't know what the future holds for Richard and me. There are days when I feel incredibly hopeful, when I believe that we can make this work, that love really can conquer all. And then there are other days when the doubts creep back in, when the practicalities and the potential for heartbreak feel overwhelming. But one thing I've learned through all of this is that love doesn't always arrive in the neat, predictable package we expect. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's surprising, and sometimes it comes in the form of a 23-year-old roommate who knows how to bake a damn good loaf of bread. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. Maybe the most important thing is that it feels real, that it feels genuine, even if it doesn't fit neatly into anyone else's expectations. So, here I am, confessing, admitting that my life took an unexpected turn, a turn that has both terrified and exhilarated me. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how this story ends, but I do know that sometimes it's in the space between what we expect and what actually happens that the real magic and the real challenges begin. And right now, I'm choosing to see the magic, at least for today. The decision to tell someone felt like crossing another significant threshold. We danced around our feelings in the privacy of our home for weeks, but acknowledging it to the outside world felt monumental. I decided to tell Lily, my best friend, during our usual Saturday morning coffee at our favorite cafe. Richard was meeting a college friend, so I had the morning to myself to prepare for what felt like a very important confession. "So," Lily said, stirring her latte, "anything new and exciting happening in your world, Em?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, yes, there is." I hesitated, unsure how to begin. Lily raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Oh? Do tell." "Well," I started, my voice a little shaky. "You know Richard, my roommate?" "Of course," Lily said, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "Is everything okay with him?" "Yes, he's fine," I reassured her quickly. "In fact, he's more than fine. Lily, Richard and I, we're kind of seeing each other." I blurted it out, then held my breath, waiting for her reaction. Lily's spoon clattered against her cup. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Seeing each other? You mean romantically?" I nodded, my cheeks flushing. "Yes." A long silence followed, broken only by the clinking of cups and the murmur of conversations around us. Lily's expression was a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't quite decipher. "Emma," she finally said, her voice low, "are you serious? Richard? He's so young." I know, I said quickly, anticipating. Her reaction. "That's the first thing everyone thinks. And believe me, it's the first thing I thought too. But Lily, it just happened. We connected, and it feels right." "Right?" Lily repeated, her tone skeptical. "Emma, he's practically a kid. What do you have in common?" "More than you think," I replied, a little defensively. "He's kind, he's thoughtful, he's intelligent, and he makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years." "But the age difference?" Lily trailed off, shaking her head. "I know it's a hurdle," I admitted. "But we're taking it one day at a time. We're being honest with each other. And honestly, Lily, I'm happy. For the first time in a long time." My voice cracked slightly on the last word. Lily reached across the table and took my hand. Her expression softened. "Oh, Em, if you're happy, then I'm happy. For you. But please, be careful. He's still figuring things out. You don't want to get hurt." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "And he's not just some kid, Lily. He's special." Later that day, when Richard got back, I told him about my conversation with Lily. "How did it go?" he asked, his eyes filled with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "She was surprised, of course," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "But ultimately, she was supportive. She just worries about me." Richard walked over and took my hands in his. "I would never intentionally hurt you, Emma. You know that, right?" "I do," I said, looking into his earnest blue eyes. "And I worry about you too sometimes. About what your friends might think, what your family will say." "My friends will probably tease me," he said with a shrug. "But they'll get over it. And my mom, well, she's always been pretty open-minded. As long as I'm happy, she's usually happy." "And are you happy, Richard?" I asked, my voice soft. He smiled, a wide, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "More than I've ever been." He pulled me closer and kissed me gently. "Now, how about we forget about what everyone else might think and just enjoy being together?" "Sounds like a plan," I said, leaning my head against his chest. As the weeks passed, Richard and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. We still had our individual routines, but now there were stolen moments throughout the day. A lingering touch as we passed in the hallway, a shared smile across the dinner table, a quiet evening spent curled up on the sofa watching a movie. And then there were the late-night talks. These were the moments when we truly connected, peeling back the layers of our individual experiences and sharing the parts of ourselves we usually kept hidden. One night, after watching an old movie, we were sitting on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "You never talk much about your marriage," Richard said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. I took a sip of my wine, looking out at the view. There's not much to tell, really. It was comfortable, predictable, like my life before you came along. "But were you happy?" he asked gently. I hesitated. I thought I was. Content, maybe, but not truly happy. Not like I feel sometimes now. I turned to look at him, the honesty of my words surprising even myself. He reached out and took my hand. "What changed?" "You did," I admitted. "You brought a spark back into my life that I didn't even realize was missing." He squeezed my hand. "You've done the same for me, Emma. Before you, life felt like I was just going through the motions. Now, everything feels more vibrant, more meaningful." Another night, we were talking about our families. "My mom is great," Richard said, a fond smile on his face. "She's always been my biggest supporter, a bit overbearing sometimes, but in a good way." "I miss my mom," I said quietly, a pang of sadness hitting me. "She would have loved you, I think." "I would have liked to meet her," Richard said softly. "What was she like?" I spent the next hour telling him stories about my mother, about her sense of humor, her kindness, her unwavering love. Richard listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, making me feel like he truly understood a part of me I rarely shared with anyone. "You know," he said later, "it's funny. We come from such different places, different generations. But it doesn't feel like that most of the time, does it?" "No," I agreed. "It really doesn't. Sometimes I forget the age difference even exists." "Me too," he said. "Except when you start talking about music from the 80s that I've never heard of." He grinned playfully. I laughed. "Hey, that was a great era for music." "Maybe you can educate me," he teased. And so we did. We shared our pasts, our hopes, our fears, our favorite songs, our silliest memories. Through these late-night talks, the layers between us peeled away, revealing a deeper connection than either of us could have anticipated. We were learning to navigate our differences, to appreciate each other's perspectives, and to build a foundation of understanding and intimacy that went beyond just physical attraction. The comfortable rhythm we had found was disrupted one Tuesday morning when Richard came into the kitchen, his expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Emma," he said, holding a letter in his hand. "This just came." I took the letter. It was from a tech company in California, a place Richard had interviewed with a few weeks prior. My stomach did a little flip. "Well?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He took a deep breath and tore open the envelope. He scanned the letter quickly, his eyes widening. "They offered me the job." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Pride, of course. This was a fantastic opportunity for him. But also a sharp pang of fear. California was a long way from here. That's amazing, Richard," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. He looked up at me, his excitement tempered by my reaction. "Yeah, it is. It's a great opportunity. But..." He trailed off, his gaze searching mine. "But..." I prompted gently. "But it's in California," he said, stating the obvious. Silence hung in the air. We both knew what this meant. "So," I said finally, forcing a smile, "when do they want you to start?" He looked back down at the letter. "They're pretty flexible. They said I could start in about a month." A month. That wasn't a lot of time. We spent the rest of the day in a strange limbo, the news hanging over us like a cloud. That evening, after dinner, we sat on the sofa, the unspoken question hanging heavy between us. "So," I said finally, breaking the silence, What are you going to do? He turned to me, his expression serious. That depends on you, Emma. On me? I asked, surprised. Yeah, he said, taking my hands in his. I can't imagine moving across the country without you. But I also don't expect you to just uproot your life and come with me. My heart swelled at his words. The fact that he even considered me a part of his future, a future that involved moving across the country for a dream job, it meant more than I could say. Richard, I said softly, I don't know what to say. Just be honest with me, he said, his gaze unwavering. How do you feel about all of this? I took a deep breath. I'm scared, I admitted. Scared of the distance, scared of the uncertainty, scared of what might happen to us if we try to make this work so far apart. I'm scared. Too, he said, but I also know what I feel for you, Emma, and I'm willing to try anything to make this work. We talked for hours that night, weighing the pros and cons, the possibilities and the challenges. We talked about long-distance relationships, about the sacrifices we would both have to make, about our hopes for the future. Maybe, I said finally, a crazy idea forming in my mind. Maybe I could come with you, at least for a while. See how it goes. Richard's eyes widened in surprise. Really? You'd do that? I nodded, a sense of excitement mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation bubbling up inside me. I would, because I don't want to lose you, Richard, and if this is your dream, I want to be there to support you. He reached out and pulled me into a tight embrace. Emma, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea how much that means to me. We held each other for a long moment, the uncertainty of the future still looming, but now mixed with a sense of hope and a renewed commitment to each other. We had a big decision to make, a leap of faith to take, but we would face it together, because sometimes the biggest risks are the ones that lead to the greatest rewards. And in that moment, holding Richard in my arms, I knew that taking this chance, no matter how scary, was a risk I was willing to take. Thanks for watching! If you enjoy our content, feel free to subscribe. Also hit that bell button. You'll receive a new infidelity story each day.